Hello again, it's Macabre Derek here with another RPG rant. Let the rambling begin. And we are rambling about non combat encounters. Ooh, what a concept, right? Let me explain what often happens in my experience. A lot of us have come to RPGs through stuff like Star Ocean, Final Fantasy, World of Warcraft, a lot of video games, right? So our general approach, if you're coming from this camp, is okay, so it's my job to design a dungeon or a scenario and fill it with monsters that the players can kill, and all of a sudden they get XP. It says in the book how much XP that they're going to get. And okay, there's treasure I got to give them. Okay, so now this kind of plays like our own version of Diablo. Kind of cool. But there's a little bit of a problem with this methodology. First and foremost, if we're playing Diablo, it takes me about, on a speed run, maybe 20 minutes. And keep in mind, I'm not great at Diablo. To be able to grind through an entire dungeon and get all the loot and, maybe upgrade a few pieces on my character, and that's about it. The thing is, though, it doesn't often tell too much of a story, but video games have a wonderful bit where they can show you visuals and let some of that tell the story. And you might end up hearing an audio track that triggers when you approach this bit, or when you encounter this character, or when you're out here, the NPC does something, right? So this is often what you end up getting built around. And so this is your approach when you first start. But then you realize that when you do this with, Dungeons and Dragons, well, it bogs down a lot, doesn't it? Some combats might take upwards of half an hour, 2 hours. I've had one that's ended up lasting 4 hours, and we got through 3 rooms out of a 60-odd dungeon because the DM was just enthralled with, I have made this massive dungeon. Now, I'm glad for his excitement, but even he started to get bored after a while. So that's why we need to end up discussing this non-combat encounters. So what's a non-combat encounter? Long story short, it's a problem that's placed before the players that does not need to be solved with combat, or is at least discouraged. The option should be there, but there's going to be obvious fallout. And at the very least, the players can have the option of, well, we could end up doing this through combat, but there might be some issues. What are some non-combat encounters I'd like to run? Now, I know that there's a lot of people who like to end up doing puzzles, especially if you come from video games, right? There's a lot of puzzles that you'd like to end up bringing in. But for my money, it's always been the political aspect, all right? I want you to imagine this scenario. You have three NPCs in the party. Now, the party might have gone through a dungeon or two, got some dust on their spurs kind of thing, and managing to make a small bit of a name for themselves for the local social elite. And what has that done? Well, okay, maybe there's a power bit between these three. Each three gives them the promise of, well, you want to be my friend, but you really don't want to be my enemy. Now, the players might end up saying, okay, well, what would you do for us? Well, now all of a sudden they're mercenaries, right? That's okay. But this ends up giving them a little bit of incentive. And what are we being asked to do? Maybe when you end up running into this group, you have this one that says, my great grandfather was once the king of this region, lost title to the usurper who sits right across. I need proof of my lineage. to come forward and state, I am the rightful ruler. After all, you are upholders of the law, right? And I can show you where this is made. The other might end up saying, no, he has no claim. His ancestors fell because they were betrayers to the realm. When their secret was outed, that's how he lost his crown. The third might end up saying, of course he would end up spreading such rumors. Neither one of them is trustworthy. One wants to end up taking hold because he hasn't done anything, but he claims to be the regent. The other one wishes to end up forcing you into, well, a position where you are usurping the rightful law, and he's using that. I am here for the people. And then the first one ends up saying, of course you're here for the people because you're of ignoble blood. Well, maybe they start to hear stories about that third one, the one who's there for the good of the people, and it turns out his idea of good of the people is a very crude form of wage slavery. Why not? Oh, well, now the player's got a bit of a situation here, don't they? And they could choose to ignore it at their peril. They can also choose to kill all three of them if they end up wanting to. But in which case they'd be outlaws. They've killed three people who are vying for this position of power across the land. You know, it doesn't have to be a major kingdom. It could be just something as small as a serf, a couple hundred acres of farmland. Make it humble, but make it interesting. Give these three very distinct personalities and give them positive and negatives. You know, let your players figure it out. Okay, what's going on? What's the deal here? And why should I care? Again, see my video on backstories. You'll be surprised on how many things you can actually associate with your players. Bring it back. And don't have them all happen to root for the same person. You know, maybe somebody's got to lose. Maybe somebody's got to put their pride or their revenge aside. Maybe somebody has to break an oath, because what kind of oath would I make to a tyrant? That's one example, the political bit, where you're sitting and you will discuss and you try and end up outwitting. Another one is the mystery, right? Sure, you might have an encounter in this scenario, but for the most part, it's figuring things out, right? Figure out what the mystery is. Now, my personal favorite is always the individual who's plotting from the back. It could be somebody who's trying to do royalty again. Maybe it's somebody who's killing off adventurers to steal their gold. There are murderers hidden amongst the crowd, and you don't know who, but this group is well versed with this small hovel of characters, maybe only 20 to 30 people in a very small roadhouse hovel, this, or what would you call it, a small village. Maybe it's somebody they're attached to. You could end up doing the puzzles as a dungeon encounter. That's always fun, if you have a mind for it. I personally don't, so I don't do these. But if you have a mind for puzzles and getting ways to figure it out, go ahead. However, warning here, if the puzzle is too difficult for the players to do, there has to be an alternate way to circumvent it. Nothing kills an entire adventure faster than, here's a puzzle. The players can't figure it out, even though all the information has been laid out, and make sure that you're very clear about all the information. So you have to give them a hint that's out of character, or maybe make them make a roll that makes them do an intelligence check to see if they'd figure something out. Doesn't work that way, and it kind of just slows the game down and makes them frustrated, and then it's like, oh, well, okay, so I roll the die and my DM just ended up giving me the answer. Not exactly what you'd call rewarding. So always make it a case of maybe it's the easier path. Maybe it's a door for treasure, but it's not necessary to the dungeon. Maybe it's a small thing going. Another one that I like to end up doing is what I would call the cat and mouse game. Instead of trying to make a dungeon filled with monsters, take one monster, just one. Maybe a few more, but it works best when it's just one. And build the dungeon so it's almost like a maze. That there's plenty of different avenues, that multiple paths that lead the same place, hidden passages that lead from one room to the other. Little ways that this person is, or creature, is able to know more about the surrounding terrain than the players do. And make it a game of cat and mouse. Now, the hard part here is you cannot pull punches, okay? The monster itself needs to be higher level than them because it's the only encounter they're ever going to run into. More often than not, any kind of effective character level or any challenge or any whatever you want to call it is based on the idea that the players are going to run across multiple opponents. Don't do that. Instead, make it a very difficult opponent, and they're locked in. I once described a scenario where the players are locked in with a single ghast. Level 1 players, single ghast. This is a tough encounter. And they're locked in to an underground cave network that's been built out of erosion underneath the local cemetery. Bodies are hanging out from the bottoms of coffins that have been dug out and chewed upon, gnawed at bone. Water fills these caverns up to ankle height. Every so often they see these strands of bone tied together by human hair, making almost curtains. Small holes seem to be bored into the rock. And if they're paying particular attention, they might notice that they go to other parts of the cavern. It's all enclosed. It's very difficult to find, and there's only one way in, one way out. They're in the dark, nothing but their torches and their swords, and something that consumes human flesh and is a predator, and a very intelligent predator. And it's stalking them in those caverns. Let them know it. Let them fear it. Let them be afraid of what's just out of sight, and let them know that it's not coming at them to kill them directly. It's going to find ways to split the party. It's going to find ways to take a single shot and run off. It has ways to keep itself regenerating. Particularly good if you're in a place that has a lot of evil necromantic energy, right? Maybe that's how this whole thing started. But now, just the presence of it being here means it heals itself very slowly, but it does. So the longer the players take, the more it continues this hit and run, hit and run, hit and run, especially with paralyzing and disease. Players have to be very careful and stretch it out. Make them think about how they're going to go about it. Think on how they're going to be picked apart. And don't put it in the player's favor. Let them know that. Let them be very aware of that just by your tone, that this thing will kill them. Make them feel helpless a bit. Then all of a sudden, instead of one combat after the next, you can use that time for tension. If you have another little tidbit, here's one for you. Not particularly action-packed, but if you have a few players who are really good with imagining a location or a world, Make learning the details, the history, a tie-in, something that will benefit them later. See, this encounter is them researching, them talking, learning about local lore, them figuring out that the king was buried with a great sword in the Arctic. So why is it that there's a wanderer, supposedly, that goes from house to house, farm to farm, with an old ragged crown on his head, rusted, and a blade that sings of magic? Surely this can't be the king. Somebody must have grave robbed the tomb, and yet the aristocracy says it can't be so. All pay their respects to the tomb. It's that laid bare. It surely would be remiss of anyone to claim that it's been robbed. Again, a mystery, but let them figure it out through the information that they draw in. Let them build up. Reward them for figuring out the world, especially on territories that they're unfamiliar with. Knowledge checks are great. Actual knowledge earned is better. And in fact, if somebody ends up taking the time to end up putting experience in those bits of lore that they've found out afterwards, you can guarantee that I'm going to reward them for that. So, there's a few ideas for your non-combat encounters. Primarily, if you're ever stuck without an idea of what you can do, always slow down and end up asking, what else is happening in this world? Sometimes it's great battles. Sometimes it's focused on a person's quest for revenge. Sometimes it's great mystery. All these are great plots. But not all great plots begin and end with the slaughter of 1,000 goblins. If you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, feel free to press the like button. If you want to end up following more of these RPG rants and come along for the ride, feel free to hit the subscribe button. The whole like, share, all that kind of BS. So, until next time.